Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this PMI Netherlands chapter session. With the Disciplined Agile Journey, our chapter continues to organize a series of DA events. Today's feature will cover insights on how Disciplined Agile compares to other methodologies. That is, how DA stacks up against, for example, SAFe, Scrum, and other Agile approaches. To help you dive into that, we are honored to welcome our guest speaker, Glen Little, whom I will introduce a bit later. Thank you all for your attendance, and we hope that you will find this insightful. My name is Kelly Britz, and I'm the Director of Professional Development, joined today by my colleague Param Sharma. Unfortunately, our DA champion, Arina, couldn't join us this evening. But should you be interested in Disciplined Agile topics, please visit our brand new and recently refreshed DA page. It can be found on the PMI website under the development section. And there you'll read more about the chapter's team, our current and future activities, any special projects, and also news related to the DA topic. As you have just seen, the session will be recorded and available to our members on demand, also non-members, but we do ask that you keep your microphones muted until the Q&A session where we can address and engage on your questions. I was asked by our membership team to share a little about our chapter, but thought I'd provide my own perspective as you can view the slides at your own convenience. The first word that comes to mind when thinking about the PMI Netherlands chapter is impact. That moment when you forget you're volunteering to help change other people's lives because it's actually changing yours. Whether the focus is professional development, networking, recognition, PDUs, or even rewards, being part of a professional community provides a sense of accomplishment. We learn new skills and gain deeper experience, all while in the pursuit of giving back selflessly. In my own journey as a member, volunteer, and now director, I've met new people, added personal and professional value, and even identified areas of focus that can enhance our chapter's value add. I've also met several inspiring project managers and created a PM community on LinkedIn. If you would like to get involved, please reach out to one of our respective teams and we would be delighted to welcome you on board as a member or even a volunteer. The contact details will also be shared in the chat. And at the end of the day, you must experience the value and feel that you are part of an inspiring, growing, and ever-learning community. It is with great pleasure that I now introduce our speaker for this evening. Glen is one of the most senior and experienced instructors and coaches at Process Mentors Incorporated, which is also a PMI authorized training provider. He has trained hundreds of people in both co-located as well as virtual formats, and was recently served as a principal consultant with Scott Ambler and Associates, where he used the DA toolkit as both a DA coach and instructor to transform enterprises to DA DevOps. This extensive experience resulted in him being inducted as one of 4 Disciplined Agile Fellows globally, the highest honor a member of the Disciplined Agile community can receive. After his presentation, we would be happy to answer some of your questions that you may have. And then it is with great pleasure, Glen, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Everyone can see that?
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
All right. I am with Process Mentors. We're small, or what we like to refer to as a boutique consulting firm based out of Jacksonville, Florida. I personally am in Toronto, Canada, and we're going to talk about Disciplined Agile. As Kelly indicated, I've been around Disciplined Agile for many years. My Agile journey started many years ago. My first Agile project was actually in 1983 when we decided to take up XP. So been around the Agile quite a while, have a good background. Feel free to ask questions at the end about anything about how DA can help you in your Agile journey. So we are going to talk about various different approaches. The two that we're going to focus in are going to be Scrum and SAFe, but there are many different approaches. One of the big things about DA is the fact that we work nicely with all of the various different approaches, because DA is not an approach on its own. What it is, it's a mindset. It's a way of thinking about Agile. So we play very nicely with Scrum. We play very nicely with SAFe, or any of the other approaches. We do real time as well as iterative. So we would play nicely in a Kanban world. So just give you a bit of a background on DA, and then you know, and where it's applicable. So my name is Glen Little. I've given you a lot of my background already, so I won't go into it, but I am a certified coach and instructor for DA for all of the different programs that are available. And Joshua and I are probably one of the two people that do the most training in DA across the world, for all that matter. Okay, so popular Agile approaches. There are a lot of different approaches. Scrum, XP are the big ones, SAFe, but there's less, and Nexus, and of course, many, many more. I want to specifically target in on Scrum to start with, and then we'll talk about SAFe in a few minutes. So Scrum versus Disciplined Agile. Key attributes of Scrum is it's probably the most prolific approach to Agile right now, okay? And it's been in use for 25 years, probably because it's very simple to get started. The whole body of knowledge for Scrum is only 13 pages. And it is focused in on small team sizes of 10 or less people. So if you're working in a nice, simple environment, and in particular, a few years ago, it used to be that Scrum said you had to be co-located to do Scrum. With, of course, the COVID situation where people aren't coming into the office, they've opened up that approach. But their main focus for Scrum has always been small, co-located teams. And it's only one life cycle. They gave you one approach, and they tell you this is the way you need to be. This is what you need to do in order to be Scrum. So it's very prescriptive. And in order to say, hey, we are a Scrum team, you must adhere to the Scrum guide. Many people who work sort of on the fringes, in particular in the DA area, we often get accused of not being Scrum enough because we don't adhere to the Scrum guidelines. So what is Scrum? For those that aren't familiar, this is basically what Scrum looks like. It's a very simple approach, primarily focused in on construction. And it's basically, how do we take a product backlog and get the work done? So it focuses in on three artifacts: the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the incremental delivery at the end. It also has 5 events, okay? The sprint planning, the actual iteration itself, okay, or the sprint in this case, because it's Scrum. They have a daily Scrum. In DA, we refer to this as a daily coordination meeting, but they have a daily meeting where the team gets together to do daily planning. At the end of it, they do a sprint review. Oftentimes, by the way, Scrum calls this a little bit different. They often call this the showcase, if you've heard that term, but it's the review at which we look at, okay, what did we do in the iteration, and what did we deliver, and what are we going to do in the next iteration? And then we have the sprint retrospective, which is basically the step back that says to the team, okay, let's look at how we worked in this sprint, and how do we improve in the next sprint. They have simple 3 roles: product owner, Scrum master, and team member. All right. Scrum requires that it be a cross-functional team. Again, it may be a small team of typically what they say it's 5 to 7 plus or minus 2. So basically you're looking at less than 10 people, but they assume that you have all of the people on the team that are needed to do the work. So you're a cross-functional team. You need to be working in an environment where you have minimal dependencies between teams. And it's an all-in adoption approach. Basically, everybody needs to be committed to doing Scrum. So what happens and where do the challenges come in when it comes down to Scrum? Okay, here's a situation where we have multiple sprints. So first of all, how do we get going? In Scrum, it's assumed that you have a product backlog already created. But how exactly do you go about doing that? If we don't have a product backlog, where do we get one? And how many sprints are we going to do? Oftentimes with Scrum, the intent here is we're going to get started and we're just going to keep going for as long as it takes. What do we do when we don't have enough sprints? What happens if we run out of money before we're done? Or what about independent testing? Do we have requirements within our organization that says it isn't just about team testing, it's about independent testing? And what about coordination of dependencies with other projects? What if our project is not completely standalone? These are all questions that the Scrum Guide does not address. And in fact, they leave it to the teams to figure this out for themselves. So in the case of Disciplined Agile, though, well, first of all, is Scrum all bad? Absolutely not. The reason Scrum is so popular is because it's simple and it's easy to get into. It's very simple to get started. The problem is that you're left to discover how to solve all of those problems we just talked about. So what Disciplined Agile does, it extends the Scrum Guide. It provides you with the guidance at what happens at the enterprise level. What happens if we have to coordinate across teams? Okay. It also supports complexity with process options and guidance for how to change your process. Okay. And it also, DA is one of those things that came about by, basically it started with Scott Ambler, and he was paid by IBM to visit teams and find out what worked for them if they were doing Agile. And we put together a whole list of practices that worked for teams. And so all of the options that are available in DA with regards to what can you do for your team to be successful are very pragmatic. We know that all of those options work for some teams. So on your journey, the Agile journey that most teams and organizations envision is often grounded in an end state representation. So here we see the flag at the end, at the top of the mountain. And so oftentimes what we're told is that's where we need to be. But how do we get there? Well, for Scrum, it's adherence to the Scrum Guide. We have a very specific prescription that we need to follow in order to be Scrum. Okay, we have a starting point. This is where we are, and we're told this is where you need to be in the end. But how far do we actually get? Well, the focus is on proficiency to the guide. In other words, we are only as good as by going through the guide, saying we're doing all of these things, that's as good as we can get. At its best, the guide will only get us so far. And again, the problem with the guide is the fact that it doesn't address all of the issues that you are going to face as a team. It's a bare bones description of what you need to do as a team. So other than for the simplest situations, it doesn't work. Now, and this is where we run into all of these situations where people say they're doing Scrum, but we also do this. So often what happens is that the initial teams make some progress. Complexity becomes a growing issue as they encounter more and more complexity. Oftentimes what ends up happening is it fails. or the adoption is stagnated. It gets to a certain point, you get a certain amount of productivity, you get a certain amount of benefit, but at some point you just peak out. There's nowhere for you to go. So what we really need is a pragmatic guided approach. Oftentimes we call this guided continuous improvement in DA, where we can go back to DA and we can look at, okay, if we're encountering problems, what can we do to solve those problems? Well, we can look in DA and we can say, well, as a team, we could try this to solve this problem. And we have a whole list of practices that we know work. So it's a question of what works for you. So we have options to ensure the process is fit for purpose. We want to know whether or not this team could use this to solve our problem. And we're going to have recognition of our context and our complexity. So we're going to pick the practices that work for us within our context, within our environment, within our level of complexity. And we're also going to have growth paths for continuous improvement. So every iteration, when we go into our retrospective, we can look at, okay, where did we struggle last time? Well, what can we do to fix it? And DA has things that you can pick up and do in the next iteration to solve your problems. Okay, Scrum promotes an all-in adoption approach. You're either before Scrum or you're after Scrum. Okay, Scrum. But what we do in DA is a different philosophy altogether. It's a question of starting where you are, making improvements, and then as you go, continue to improve. So it's a very pragmatic approach. It's not all or nothing. DA has many options for tailoring the way you work. And it's a goal-driven approach. So you can actually look at, okay, in this particular area, what are some of the decisions points we need to make? And what are the options associated with that? The strength in DA is not the practices. It's not the process. It's not the prescription. It's about the fact that it's a wealth of knowledge of what worked for Agile, what works in given situations, and can we adopt that as a team? So there's no minimum starting point required. You can start where you are, adopt some practices as you go, and continuously improve. And so we provide you with paths for the future. So avoid the prescription. One size does not fit all. The one problem with Scrum is the fact that it doesn't account for the fact that every team is different. Every team has a different set of personalities. Every team has a different set of skills. And so a prescriptive approach doesn't work for all teams. So we also want to start with your particular context and culture in mind. DA provides a robust body of knowledge, including the best practices and techniques recognized in all Agile approaches. DA, when it put together its toolkit, shamelessly went out and stole from all of the other approaches, all of the things that worked. And so it is a collection of practices that people can use to solve problems in their particular context. So ensure the process is always fit for purpose. Choose your way of working. The heart is the heart of Disciplined Agile, and we'll ensure that our process will always be fit for purpose. We always want each team to be able to pick the way they work. Now, it isn't a free-for-all. All right, just because every team has the right to choose their way of working doesn't mean that they can go out and randomly choose whatever they want to do. Okay, they still have to do it within the context of the enterprise. Okay, so there will always be some restrictions on what the teams can do, but generally the teams can choose their own way of working. So the Agile lifecycle inside DA, this is the Scrum lifecycle, and DA sits very nicely on top of that as part of what we refer to the construction phase of a project. But there's a lot more than just the Scrum part or the construction part of an iteration. So the DA Scrum lifecycle looks like this. And I'm not going to go into all of the details of this, but what you will notice here is there's a whole piece on the left-hand side of these are the inputs coming in from the enterprise into, oh, let's build up this product backlog. So in Scrum, there's nothing that says, how does that product backlog get built? Well, in DA, we outline a whole process and a whole procedure and a whole enterprise support for building out that product backlog. And that includes the portfolio management at the enterprise level, the product management at the enterprise level, and also the enterprise architecture at the enterprise level. All of that feeds into the work items. And we also notice have an inception phase, which is a planning phase. Well, Scrum doesn't call it out. Lots of Scrum teams still had a project planning phase. Oftentimes they called it sprint zero. But what it is, we do, Scott Ambler and Associates has always done surveys for many, many years. And what we found was that 85 or 90% of all teams had a planning phase. So we just decided we'd call it out. Okay, and we called it inception. It actually came from RUP, but it doesn't really matter where it came from. But the name basically is inception. It's how do we get the plan together? Who needs to be on the team? What's the testing strategy? What's the architecture strategy? All of those things that go into setting up for success. Notice as well, though, that we don't just end after construction. We have this other phase that we refer to as transition. And transition is, okay, so we produce something out of the team. Now what? Transition is about then, how do we get from development into production? And so we do have a consumable solution being created by the sprint, by the iterations, by the project. And it's a question of how do we release it into production? Well, we have other enterprise support out there, such as IT operations, who are actually going to be doing things like doing the promote. And then once it's out there, we may also have support. If you have customers who are using your product and they have a problem, who are they going to call? They're going to call some sort of a support group. And that's really what we're talking about. So now we have not only construction, it's not about just building something. It really is an end-to-end solution for your project. So this is a really big extension to what Scrum proposes. Not going to get into all of the details of this, but we also have lightweight governance built into this process lifecycle, in which case we have some lightweight milestones down here that allow us to determine where are we as a team, are we being successful, are we continuing to be successful, and have we produced the right solution? So it's a very complicated, it's quite a complex diagram, but it shows you how much DA extends Scrum. So Disciplined Agile extends Scrum to include enterprise considerations and a lightweight governance approach. So we will come back to what DA is, but let's also now have a look at the SAFe or the Scaled Agile framework, okay, versus Disciplined Agile, because Scrum is at the one end. It's a very simple approach, okay, and it's intended for small co-located teams. SAFe, on the other hand, is intended for really large teams. It doesn't work well on a small team basis. So key attributes is it leverages Scrum as its underlying team formation. Now, this was the original SAFe. I'm told that SAFe now is allowing the teams to use other than Scrum, but the original SAFe and the original philosophy behind SAFe was that all teams would be doing Scrum. So it also is a gigantic body of knowledge. Dean Leffingwell did really well at pulling a whole bunch of different concepts together and saying, this is what you need to do in order to scale this up. So the benefits are for large scale developments. The smallest use is for 50 to 125 team members. I've heard people say that it's really hard to do this with just 50. And I have had other people say I wouldn't do SAFE with under 250 people, but the original specs are set up as 50 to 125 people. And it's a team of teams approach. So the intent of SAFE is to tackle big problems that single teams can't handle. It is, however, very prescriptive. And in order to do SAFE, you must follow SAFE's precise approach. All right, so the original thought here is that you have a minimum of 5 teams, but it also can be expanded, 5 teams with about 50 team members, but it also can be expanded to include, about 12 Scrum teams or 125 team members. So it's targeted again at a really big problem. Lots of people, one of the companies that I know that adopted SAFE, and I was involved in it maybe 6 or 8 years ago now, but Ford Motor Company here in Canada decided to adopt SAFE because they could do their whole organization using SAFE. If you're a small organization, less than 150 to 100 people, then SAFE is not for you. It's not a one size fits all. So that's a lot of people. You need a large scale development to get benefit from this particular approach. And I'm not maligning SAFE. This is what they say, okay, is that SAFE is not intended for small scale operations. It's intended to tackle the big problems. So this is the SAFE 5 for lean enterprises. This is their particular diagram that shows how it all hangs together. Okay. What it implies here, though, is that you're making organizational changes. Okay. It isn't about we're going to take a team and do SAFE. It's about we're going to change our whole enterprise to deal with SAFE. Needs to follow a static implementation roadmap. So again, going back to the Disciplined Agile, our whole philosophy is start where you are, make improvements, and continue to improve. So we have a team of teams lifecycle. So if we run into the situation where we need to have multiple teams working together because we have a big program, we also have a solution. As a 6-team-based life cycles, so it isn't about just Scrum. It isn't about just a program, but we actually have 6 different life cycles that you can use, depending on your context, depending on your situation. One of those life cycles is a team of teams approach that we call a program life cycle. Okay, DA's approach can be tailored to fit for purpose. SAFE cannot. Even though we have a team of teams approach, we don't tell you what the teams need to do. So you can have multiple teams doing different life cycles, including some may be doing Scrum, some may be doing Lean, some may be doing iteration development, some may be doing continuous delivery. Okay, so all of those approaches or combinations of approaches are available within DA. SAFE requires significant organizational changes, and again, DA does not. We're going to start with where your organization is right now, and we will slowly start making changes to improve the way you're working. So, Disciplined Agile has it all. Now, the trick is, there is good in many of the available Agile approaches, okay? But Agile is not simple, okay? There are over a dozen popular Agile approaches and hundreds of strategies and practices and techniques. And all of those strategies and techniques tend to compete. You will hear people say we are a Scrum shop. You will hear people say we are a safe shop. Okay, DA doesn't feel you need to do that. So with Scrum, you have a lot of different practices. With XP, you have additional practices. With Kanban, you have additional practices. Each of these different approaches brings in a lot more practices. And so what we've got is we end up with, and there's a bunch of other ones as well. We've talked only here about, SAFe and Scrum, but there's Kanban, Lean, there's Open Up, there's DevOps, there's the PMI's PMBOK guide. There's a lot more. DSDM, there's a whole bunch of different approaches involved. And as a result, what happens is there's this whole clutter, and it gets very difficult for people to figure out how to start. And what DA provides us with is it provides us with a quick way of easily tailoring a way of work specific to your needs. So just wanted to give you that overview. I realized that was probably, I had 40 minutes. I think I've only taken about 20 or 25. I might actually, give me 1 minute. I'm actually going to bring up something else that I want to show you as part of sorry, I thought I had this up already, but I don't. Wanted to just show you this. This is what Disciplined Agile I mentioned earlier about DA is more of a mindset than a practice. Well, this is the mindset associated with DA. And it breaks down into principles, promises, and guidelines. But what this shows you here is the philosophy behind DA. I had talked earlier about building a way of working that is pragmatic. Well, one of our basic principles is pragmatic. I talked about working within a context. That's because context counts. And the fact that you can choose as a team because choice is good. I'm not going to go through all of this, but there's also promises associated with living up to those principles. And some of those are things like create a psychological, safe, and embrace diversity. Sorry, create psychological safety and embrace diversity. Okay, it's about making sure that we're focusing in on the people, make all work and workflow visible. Okay, collaborate proactively. It's about the way we work. It's a philosophy behind the way we work and how we become an empowered, powerful team. We want to be awesome teams. How do we do that? Then we fulfill the promises and we meet the guidelines. Okay. Give me one more second to go back to where it was. So we do have a promotion here, and I was told to make sure that this was included. We do provide a 15% discount on any of our PMI DA courses. The certification courses are the DASM, DASSM, DAC, and DAVSC, which is the Scrum Master course, Senior Scrum Master course, the coaching course, and then the Value Stream Consultancy course. So there's the promo code. The promo code is valid until September 30th, 2022. And for those that feel free to contact me, feel free to go to the Process Mentors webpage to look up what the courses and the availability of the courses. We tend to do all of these courses once a month. So we should be able to hit anybody's anybody's schedule. Typically we do them Eastern Standard Time, but if you happen to be part of a group and you can get 4 or 5 people together, we're happy to run it whatever time zone you'd like. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Glenn. That was very insightful. I think given the group size, maybe if you'd like to either post your questions in the chat or maybe just raise your hand or unmute and ask us yourself.
I can probably stop sharing too. I feel like. Or you can stop me sharing.
You can, but I don't think it's necessary. Hi, Yoke. Yes, I see your hand. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, please. Hi. Thanks for that talk, Glenn. It was great. Gave a lot of new insights. I am trying to figure out if Disciplined Agile is something we want to get into with our organization. So I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit more about what type of work it's suited for. Like, I know that standard like Agile and Scrum, that's really well suited for DevOps, which is not what we're doing. So I have used it in the past, the DevOps team, but let me explain a little bit better. I guess the type of projects that we're running are not like super straightforward and can't always be planned waterfall like, and that's why I'm sort of exploring other options. But I'm wondering if this is only suited for DevOps like IT solution like approaches or not. Does that make sense, this question? Sorry.
No, it absolutely. I mean, we get this, in fact, we get this question a lot is, where is Agile useful for? And, or what is Agile useful for? So it's important to understand that, again, both Scrum and SAFe are really targeted towards IT environments. DA is not. In fact, we have 2 life cycles which are specifically not IT oriented life cycles. And I have been into organizations. I've been doing this a long time, but I've been into organizations where we might go into a marketing department and they want to know, how do we manage our sales? Has nothing to do with IT. But oftentimes what ends up happening is we get into a group, other people say, hey, these guys are going Agile, maybe we should consider it as well. And you end up, now you do the sales department, you do the graphics department, and then you start moving into IT department. Oftentimes as well, we'll be brought in by a PMO that says we're having real problems managing our portfolios. How do we do that? How do we put the proper processes in place? Well, we can go in and DA as solutions at all of those different levels. So yeah, this is not about IT. A lot of the initial work that gets done, and oftentimes with the training courses, we focus in on IT, but we've been working with pharmacy groups, we've been working with marketing groups or graphics groups, or all sorts of different groups. It doesn't have to be IT. Now, some of the names you may want to change. For instance, oftentimes in DAA, one of the roles that we talk about is the architecture owner. It's an expansion over what Scrum has. Well, if you're not doing IT, architecture may not make any sense. But that doesn't mean there isn't somebody who needs to be talking to you about the details of what it is you need to deliver, right? So, and they could be technical details, right? So you call them something else. We're not about necessarily using those role names because they're just a hat. They're not something. Typically, we don't hire in for an architecture owner. They're some sort of a technical lead within our organization, and they take on that role. So they're just a hat that people put on. But yeah, this is very pertinent to outside of IT. And again, if you are dealing with something like a marketing group, you don't want to be using iterations, right? You want to get the work done and get it out and be dealing with your clients on a regular basis. So you'd be using more of a lean approach. And we have a lean life cycle that we would use Kanban to manage. And oftentimes in working with groups like marketing and sales groups, I'll go in and first thing we do is, okay, let's look at your value stream. Let's create a Kanban board. Let's figure out how you are delivering your work and how we can manage the work across your organization or even within your team.
It makes a lot of sense.
That help?
Yeah, definitely. I do have a small follow-up question that's related, if I may, Kelly, or I don't know how many other questions there are.
Sure, go ahead. I'll read the rest of the questions after that. Go ahead.
Okay. Based on what you're saying, I'm wondering, is Disciplined Agile more a approach for processes and operations and not so much projects with a beginning and an end, which, you know, PMP is really like a project has a beginning and an end. Like, and it feels like this is way more just about ongoing operations, or am I wrong?
No. Again, when we go back and look at the phases approach, we actually refer to all of our life cycles that have the inception, construction, and transition phases as project life cycles, because you are actually planning them out, doing the work, and then delivering them to production. But we also have non-project, which are continuous delivery ones, in which, okay, the backlog just keeps getting refreshed. So we just keep working away and we look at, okay, what's our next release? And you work on the next release, right? So it isn't, we'll handle that. One of the things about DA is the fact that we have a rich enough, and we refer to ourselves actually as a toolkit, not an approach, okay? Because basically as a team, you can look at what's the type of work we have, what life cycle should we be using? What's our context? Okay, what team do we need? How big does the team need to be? Maybe you can get by with a 5-person team, depending on what it is you're doing, but you may have to go up to 15, 20, or 30 people. I have seen teams that were, you know, bigger than that, but it becomes a little unwieldy when you get to 30 and 40 and 50 people in a team. And almost inevitably, they break down into independent teams that all coordinate their work. So they become a program as opposed to individual teams working on things. But yeah, we have lots of flexibility within DA to handle whatever context you happen to be working with.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. We've got from Janet in the chat. Are there specific tools in use to support DA?
So we can use, let me take the step back. We tend to be tool agnostic. We don't actually care which tools you use. You can use the Atlassian suite, you can use Rally, you can use whatever tool suite you want. We're about the approach. And quite frankly, if I'm working with a brand new team and they're looking at, hey, we need to be doing this new work, I always look at, okay, so what is the work you want to do? Let's set up a process and then let's pick the tool that supports it. As opposed to, oh, we've got this tool, will DA work within this tool, right? So yeah, need to be a little bit careful. It's always people and processes over tools every time. But if you happen to be forced through your enterprise to use a particular tool set, we'll be happy to work with whatever tool set you've got.
Thank you. Then Deirdre wants to know, could you elaborate on the 6 DA life cycles?
I can. In fact, give me 1 second here while I find my Zoom and share my screen again. So this is the 6 DA life cycles. I'm just going to step them all up here. So we talked about the Agile life cycle, which is based on Scrum. We also have a continuous delivery Agile life cycle. And basically what that says is we are now working within a mature DevOps environment. So getting stuff out is no longer a task. It's no longer a big effort. It's no longer about planning. It's the stuff is ready, push a button and it goes. It also means that we have a constantly refreshing product backlog at the front. So we no longer need to do inception. So we're focusing on at the end of every iteration, we're delivering to production. That's what we, or every other iteration, whichever. But we're continuously delivering at the end in small increments out to production. We also have the lean life cycle, which is more of a continuous flow. Instead of having iterations, we have what we refer to as a work item pool. And those work item pools are things like individual items that we're going to pull an item in, work on it, and deliver it. Pull the next item in, work on it, and deliver it. Where would you use something like this? Well, I mentioned a minute ago, if I was working on marketing, then I want to bring in a job, get it done, get it out, then move back onto the next job. If I was working in a product support environment, I might have requests constantly coming into a backlog where they're getting prioritized and we're working on an individual request, delivering on it and continuing. That would be a lean approach, oftentimes managed by Kanban boards. Continuous delivery lean approach is where each time I actually finish one of those tasks, it's going out to production. Okay. The other two are a little bit different. We have the exploratory lean life cycle. The exploratory is Eric Ries's the lean startup approach, where you don't know whether or not there is a market for your product. So you are exploring the market to find out if anybody cares. So you're going to build a minimum viable product. You're going to put it out there. You're going to have a bunch of metrics on it to determine whether or not anybody wants it. And if anybody wants it, then we will productize. If we find nobody wants it, then we're going to pivot and we're going to go create something else. So the exploratory life cycle is about discovering whether or not there is something, there is a value to what it is we're producing. And then we have the program life cycle, which is basically DA's answer to SAFe. Program life cycle is where we have a team of teams that all need to work together and coordinate their activities. Okay. I don't know whether or not I actually have those diagrams right now. I don't have those life cycles, but all of these life cycles are available. You can go out to the the PMI DA site. All of those life cycles are available to go out and have a look at.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Then Bob asked, I am working for an engineering company as a PM. How is the voice of the customer heard in DA? Is the client part of the team, or is he heard at the end in the review?
So similar ways to, so absolutely not at the end. The intent of DA is to be working continuously with the customer. We do have the voice of the customer coming in through the product owner, but we have this concept in DA of a stakeholder, which is anybody who has anything at stake for delivering successful. That may be another team that we need to interact with or interface with, or either coming into us or going out from us, but it also would be any other customer or end user as well. And we would expect that as we go through this, we would be constantly getting input from our customer. Product owner is the representative of all of those end customers. But I would expect that at a iteration review, for instance, that we would be bringing real customers in to evaluate whether or not we're delivering value. Again, the basic premise of Agile is to be delivering value to the customer. So you constantly want to be interacting with that customer and determining, hey, is this what you want? And the advantage, of course, of an Agile approach is the fact that, if you're doing a 2-week iteration, it means that we get feedback from the customer every 2 weeks as to whether or not this is of value to them and are we going in the right direction. Does that answer that, or is that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a real good explanation. I have another question. What is the position of the project manager in these kind of teams or method?
Interesting question, because sorry, just looking at the time here, I could go on at great length with this, so I'll give you the short answer. And the short answer is that oftentimes in Agile and oftentimes in Scrum, the retort is there is no role for a project manager, right? And in DA, we don't take that position. The project manager, but again, keep in mind that we talk about hats, roles that people play. So project manager is a particular skill set. And I know people get hired in as project managers, but from a DA perspective, they really are a skill set they're bringing to the team. Now, they could play the role of a team lead or Scrum Master from a Scrum perspective. DA, we call it a team lead because their role is to facilitate meetings or ceremonies for the team to make sure that the team is working on the right stuff and to try and remove impediments. Okay, a little bit a broader definition than what we'd expect of a Scrum Master, but nonetheless, that's the role we choose. However, oftentimes project managers are not suited for that role because that's not their temperament. And I come from a project management background. I was a technical project manager for many years, and moving into Agile, it's really tough for me not to tell people what to say or what to do because that's the temperament typically for a project manager. They like to be in charge. They like command and control. So what we try to do really is look at, okay, so where is that more important? Well, we don't actually need a project manager as part of the team because the team can be responsible for logging their own time. They don't have to have somebody going through and doing reviews and collecting timesheets and that sort of stuff, which is oftentimes the busy work that most project managers end up having to do. What we really want the project managers to do is look at how does the work flow across the teams and managing on making the organization better so that the work does flow across the teams much better. This is I don't have time to sort of dive into this, but really their role is to be managing the value stream. How does work flow into the teams? How does it flow across the teams? How do we get it out? How do we get rid of the impediments across teams? How do we get rid of get rid of the problems and interactions between teams or the conflicting schedules between teams? That's really where project managers can provide a lot more value than the day-to-day management of people resources. Keeping in mind that we don't actually refer to people, we talk about people management rather than human resources, because people are not resources. Resources imply that they're interchangeable and they're not. Right? Does that sort of answer the question? I know it was
yes.
High level.
No, it's very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Then we've got one last question in the chat. Is there an Agile methodology that is preferred for aftercare? So after transition phase when in operation, especially when there is a large backlog of tickets, what will be the best approach to realize best and fastest improvements?
I'll give you a bit of a snide response to start with, and then I'll explain, is you should not have a large number of tickets because what it means is you're not focusing on the quality coming out of the teams. However, having been in that situation many times, yes, there is a life cycle. And quite frankly, I would probably be looking at a lean life cycle where I would be looking at taking in each ticket, getting it done, moving through. Depending on the number of tickets you may, or the huge backlog, and I have worked with customers that had thousands of defects, and they ended up creating 5 teams, and they went through iterations of solving these tickets and delivering them, and then they actually coordinated the efforts across all 5 teams to make sure that they could do a release of all of the defects that were being done at every 2 weeks. So it depends on the size, it depends on your context, but But generally, if you're managing through tickets and you've got a reasonably mature DevOps process in place, then you should be able to pull in a ticket, have the solution, release the solution to production. But again, context counts. Not every organization is prepared to do that. And I've worked with many organizations that, for instance, have a once a month release, right? They're actually doing release trains, to use a safe terminology. And basically all of the fixes get bundled up every 4 weeks and released. So in that case, using iterations works just fine.
Rin, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for the answer.
Okay.
Then on that note, I think we can wrap it up. I'd like to say thank you to Glen for a very insightful session and for finding time in your schedule to present to us. Also, big thank you to our DA champion that couldn't be here this evening, who organized this event, and all the teams behind the scenes who helped to make this event happen. Param, Pam, thank you very much. I'd like to remind everyone to register your PDU codes. Param, if you can please just post that in the chat for us again. And then thank you to each of our participants for joining this evening. We hope you found the session insightful. If there is still any questions or after debates that you'd like to get some clarity on, please feel free to connect with any of us, either through the emails shared earlier on the chat or through LinkedIn, as we are building our communities as well. And then we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.